I'm a park ranger, but I don't really have any scary stories on the job. But I used to be in a group that's somewhat like the Scouts, and we spent a lot of time in the woods, and some weird shit happened often, but most of the time it was easy to explain. One thing happened though, that to this day scares the ever-living shit out of me. I was a leader for the age group of 8 to 10-year-olds, and we were out on a camping trip. It was the first year we stayed on that terrain, and it was huge. Normally, we tend to explore the majority of a terrain before the kids even arrive, so we are aware of any of the possible dangerous spots. This time, that was impossible to do. Every camp, we have what we call a night game. It's usually a scary game in which the kids have to complete several tasks while the leaders scare the ever-loving shit out of them. Obviously, we had one too many during that camp. We masked up as monsters and hid out in the woods, close to checkpoints that they had to pass. While running in between checkpoints, I found an open stretch of forest with little to no foliage, so it was ideal for chasing after them. There was no real room to hide besides behind trees, so I couldn't use my flashlight or they'd be able to see me from miles away. It was dark, like the unsettling kind of dark that plays tricks on your eyes, and you start imagining things that aren't real. During my stay there, I saw a shadow that was around my size running past me a few times. I couldn't see it very well, so I just assumed I was imagining things because nothing was there when I turned my flashlight on. The game was nearing its end, and I saw the shadow again. This time, I could see it was vaguely standing near a tree, not too far away from me. I thought it was one of those other leaders hiding to scare the kids and decided to go over there as it was time to go back. I aimed my flashlight towards the tree, and while getting closer, I noticed that there was, indeed, someone standing there, dressed in what looked like a torn burlap sack, and their head covered with a few white plastic bags that looked like they were tied together. I started to feel pure dread. Something felt really off. I asked if everything was okay, but they didn't respond. The only thing I heard was this weird sound of what sounded like someone knocking on wood. Nevertheless, I went a bit closer, until I was about 10 meters away from this person. The knocking sound turned out to be that person smacking his head repeatedly into the tree, and I noticed he looked like a male. He was barefoot and his arms and legs were covered with crusted mud. His hands were in a weird cramped position. It was, I just can't explain it. I was convinced this was just one of those other leaders pulling a prank, so I told him to knock it off. He slowly turned his head and started walking towards me. Something inside me just told me to run. It didn't matter if it was just a stupid prank, and I ran away scared for nothing. If this wasn't a prank, it felt like I was in serious danger, so I ran as fast as I could. I heard him running after me, but I didn't want to turn around and look as I'd probably run into a tree. I arrived back at campsite, and every single person that could be dressed like that was already there. They couldn't have gotten there before me. If they did, they sure as hell didn't have the time to change into their regular clothes. Still, I told them and they gave me a good scare with that. They just looked weird at me, thinking I was trying to scare them, and we left it at that. The next day I wanted to go check it out. Who knows, maybe some weirdo ate some wrong mushroom and might be out there dying from hypothermia. I took someone else with me just in case, and there was nothing but endless trees. We arrived at the tree where I saw the person banging his head, and there was a dead, skinned, decomposing rabbit nailed to the tree. We called the cops. They looked around quickly and brushed it off as just a prank from another scouting group or some kids from the nearby town and left it at that. We didn't notice anything weird after that, so it probably was a prank or something. But seriously, if it was, somebody has some fucked up humor. I was in the Gila wilderness, and a convoy of us rangers were making the drive on the dirt road from Mongolian to Snow Lake when we spotted a forest ranger guy pulled over looking in a ditch. Turns out, some idiot tried to make a U-turn and didn't realize the loose rock makes it hard to stop. They went over the edge and they high-centered. We're miles from the nearest official campground, and it's early spring and the nighttime gets pretty damn cold. We get a jeep with our winch in position and start to pull the guy out of the ditch. Off a hill comes a white dude in a purple velvet sweatsuit. He's got a walking stick, fanny pack, and the purple velvet sweatsuit. That's it. He's a blonde dude and pretty skinny. He comes up to us and tells us he's German and having a great time. We could not get over the purple velvet suit. It was like a real pimp sweatsuit. The ranger is immediately suspicious, wants to know where he's staying and where he came from. It was around 9 in the morning, and the only way he could have gotten there where he came from was hiking for hours. The German guy is goofy as fuck and just points off towards the other mountain when he asks where he's staying and going. We all think it's funny, but also question how the guy is getting along with no water, no food, and the sun is intense, over 5,000 feet even if it's only 75 degrees. The German guy refuses water or any help and just crosses the road and goes off into the woods. The ranger told us he can't really keep the guy from doing that since he seemed okay. He said he'd check a few campsites in that direction later and see if he made it. We got to Snow Lake and commenced drinking like fish in order to better catch fish. That evening, that ranger pops by to tell us that nobody at that other camp had ever seen the dude. He radioed around and no other rangers had found abandoned camps or had any missing hikers, and they surely hadn't seen a German dude in a purple pimp sweatsuit. That ranger rode off duty the next day, and his replacement came by to make sure that the other ranger was smoking something we gave him. Never heard a word about the German in the purple pimp suit ever again, but it does make for a good story. Kind of creepy, kind of funny, but at the same time, kind of disturbing. This is gonna be a little mundane to a lot of other stories I hear on this channel, but I worked for a few months as a park ranger with the Florida Forest Service at my local state forest. The creepiest thing I saw was a poor young man who hung himself on my second week on the job. The unexplainable, though, are obviously not as cut and dry. We'd have children's clothes neatly folded up and left on trails, pairs of shoes in the middle of our dense burn blocks, and just a general sense of eeriness. My first few weeks on the job, I was easily spooked, but after I got into my groove of spending hours alone in the woods, it took a lot to shake me. When the forest goes silent, pack up and move along. There's a lot of creepy stuff that happens out here, and the one thing that I think stands out from my local place is all these weird clothes that just show up, all nice and neat, in very odd areas. Places that these clothes should have never even ended up. And there are real no camping areas out here in this state park, so it doesn't really make too much sense how they got there. Anyways, it creeps the hell out of me, and I'm glad I don't work there anymore. Back in 2010, I was stationed away from home for military duty near a mountain range. Me and two of my equally bored buddies dedicated our weekends to explore the area. We would randomly choose a peak or a valley and try to see the end of it. We would usually hike off trails to experience total solitude. It was one of those days, and we didn't pack any camping gear because we expected to return back to base before dark. It didn't go as planned, as we sort of lost track and it was already nighttime, way into darkness. We were stuck in some random place we didn't know, and we were in a tense mood. We kept arguing about how we got lost, how we should have taken another route and whose fault it was, the typical stuff. After some silent treatment, we saw the light of a small village a few kilometers away. It was a relief. We decided to reach the village and sleep over there. We rapidly hiked lower from the hills and ended up in a dried canyon. The canyon would make turns to the right and left every 50 meters or so, and we couldn't see what was ahead of us. We kept walking under the moon without torches. Just before one of these turns, I saw a couple of glowing eyes in the distance. I didn't make much of it. It could have been any random animal. We were used to it, so we kept walking, and as we made the turn, more and more eyes started popping out. They were directly looking at us. They were not making a sound, and they were not moving. As we walked closer, the number of eyes multiplied. There were maybe hundreds of eyes looking right at us. Large, glowing green eyes. They belonged to something, possibly as tall as us. I couldn't think of any animals that large. We stopped where we were. We froze right over there. The canyon had two ways. Ahead of us were big, fucking alien eyes. And behind us, there was a big fucking mountain. We had nowhere to go. After a moment of total confusion, one of my buddies took his torch and directed it at the eyes. As soon as the light reached them, they started running around. There was fucking chaos. The eyes were moving at every possible direction. There were loud barks, and we could tell some of them were running right at us. We couldn't do shit, and we fucking froze. All I could do was take out my torch and knife. I accepted my fate, and I was totally in to get to some of their blood. Then, I started seeing them. I could see who those eyes belonged to. They were running right at us. A pack of unbelievably huge shepherd dogs were running towards us, and the remaining set of eyes belonged to very large packs of cows. It was a relief. Sort of. We were not about to be killed by bloodthirsty zombies, outer galaxy aliens, or Chernobyl mutants. But these dogs could definitely harm us and kill us very easy. We quickly closed the ranks and directed our torches in their eyes. The dogs stopped at a 3-meter distance, and they completely circled us. We were stuck there for a couple of minutes, and they kept running around us. Then a man with a hunting rifle appeared in the distance. He shooed away the dogs, and it was once again peaceful. We walked back to the village with him, and his brother took us back to civilization with his tractor. We didn't die. And, geez, those feral dogs, or whatever, were definitely creepy. Okay, so I'm about 14 years old, and I'm a male. And this story happened about 2 years ago. I was staying in my family's country house, which is some sort of farm, like every other summer. So this house is in the mountains and is surrounded by a huge forest. The nearest town is about a half an hour away by car. To the west, there is a valley with a trail that takes you all the way down to the bottom of the valley. One foggy day, I was going for a walk in the valley, like I always do, especially on cloudy days like this, because walking around the valley, while the only thing you hear is nature, and the only thing you feel is little drops of water of mist, is very peaceful. So, everything went well until I reached the bottom of the valley, and I was about to turn back to my house. It's then that I started hearing some sort of whistles. At first, I thought it was the birds, but as I kept going up the road, I began to hear footsteps. I started freaking out a bit, so I began to walk faster. Then, I thought that my cousin who was staying in the house with me and my family, who usually tried to scare me with things like this, was there. So I stopped walking and began to laugh and tell him that I'm not so dumb. I expected him to appear from the mist and laugh too, but nothing happened. I continued telling him stuff like that, but still nothing occurred. So, I continued walking, thinking that it was him who was doing it, until I began to hear whistles, not only from my back, but from every direction. At that point, the fog was thick and I couldn't see the surroundings. So I started to feel scared, way more than before, and I began to walk very fast. I kept hearing the footsteps and the whistles, and I started to turn back from time to time to see if anyone was there, but I was seeing nothing. Then, instead of walking fast, I began to run, and that's when I heard some sort of psychopath laughter, and I started to run very, very fast, like I've never ran in my life. I heard it running too, and laughing and whistling. It was doing everything at the same time. I kept turning back, but I kept seeing nothing. I ran until it reached a house, and when I did, everything just seemed to stop. The footsteps, the whistling, the laughing, even the fog seemed to disappear. I told everything to my family, and they thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, because it is very rare to see people in the middle of nowhere. Like I said, the house is about a half an hour away from the nearest town by car, and the only road there takes you to our house. And if someone had gone in the forest, we would have definitely seen it. I told them that it was a person, because I heard laughing. So, we all stayed in the house for the rest of the day and left the next one. I've had some pretty bad nightmares, and I no longer go for walks alone in the forest. But nothing was ever happening to me again. However, the reason why I tell you this story is because I recently discovered that on the other side of the valley lived a crazy man who hanged himself over 30 years ago. My father says that he would randomly laugh so high that they would hear him from our house. I'm not ensuring that he was the one that stalked me, but maybe his ghost. But I don't know. I have a friend who is a trail ranger. Basically a ranger who can't get you in trouble. He told me about this time he was gathering illegally placed wildlife cameras and knocking down hunting stands, feeders, and blinds with another actual ranger. The other ranger wasn't feeling well, so he said he was going to head back as it's an hour ATV ride. My friend finished up the last one when he heard voices. Keep in mind, he's far off the beaten path. He called out and no one replied. As it's getting dark, he started to head back and found that his ATV wouldn't start. He then noticed that the battery was not connected anymore. He reconnected it and started to drive, but it wasn't going fast at all. Less than a half a mile later, the whole thing died. He radioed back, basically saying, "Hey guys, I need someone to come pick me up." They already told him that they would, but it would be an hour. He asked if the other guy got back, and they said no. He settled down and started a small fire, but before long he heard the voices again. It's dark, he's not happy, and the voices sound like an argument now. Someone was angry and yelling at someone else who sounded more scared. He called out and asked if anyone needed help. The voices didn't seem to care. He guessed they had to be less than 1,000 feet away. He radioed again, and they said they were having trouble finding what path he might be on, and haven't left yet. He asked them just to get the other ranger and to tell them where they are because he left with the iPad that had the map. They said he still hasn't come back. About 3 more minutes go by, and he hears the voices start up again. He decides to walk to them, hoping maybe they can stop being drunk assholes and maybe have a map. He walked in their direction, but the voices seemed to be getting further as he got closer. Finally, after 20 minutes he gave up and walked back. He got a radio call, and they said the other guy was found passed out covered in vomit and was being taken to the hospital, but he crossed off everywhere they found to stand, so they have a general idea where he is. Then, the radio died. Then the voices came back. Bored out of his mind, he decided to listen to what they were arguing about, picking up things like, "Well, it wasn't yours to take. I don't fucking care. You better know," and so on. His guess was 2 hunters were arguing over a kill. Then he heard one of them shout something unintelligible. Then silence. Then bang! A gunshot. He doused his fire and hid. After that, he heard nothing, just his breathing for the next half hour until he saw ATV lights. He told the guy picking him up that everything, and they called back. They had people looking for 3 hours and found nothing. They came back the next day with police and dogs. After about an hour, a shallow grave was found, and in it was a long dead man who had clearly been shot in the face. Thing was, it was a skeleton who was there for years. So either the argument he had just ended with a bang and both parties went home last night, or he heard the murder of someone from years ago. Back in 2010, I had just finished a wilderness leadership class and decided to go to Colorado to get some solo wilderness time. I found out about some hot springs near the Colorado River that were only accessible during the winter. During the summer, the snow melts and it raises the water level of the river and they become submerged. I decided to go spend a few weeks out there. It was on BLM land and I had about a 4-mile hike from where I had parked to where I was camping. The BLM lady who watched the land saw me, and when I arrived, she asked me to just write the date on my windshield every week to let her know I'm still alive out there. Anyways, it was pretty pleasant out there, but every night I was terrified of the bears. They should be sleeping, but if they aren't, it means they are hungry as fuck and I'm for dinner. For this reason, I decided to set up camp close to a cliff. It was about 40 feet down to a river, and I figured, worst case scenario, I could jump and then get out of the hot springs to prevent hypothermia. It's a crazy plan, but once you're out there and you realize bear spray is kinda useless inside the tent, so one early morning, I hear those loud animal noises outside my tent. They're getting closer and very loud, accompanied by grunting and breathing noises. I was too scared to open my tent. I just froze. And then I laid there. It starts to move away from my tent but is still out there. And now I hear more than one animal. Finally, I poke my head out. It was a few bear, just slinking along. And then, a herd of elk. I swear though, it was probably the most scared I've ever been out camping. I was the lone recreation ranger in a small district in southern Idaho. The nearest town from the guard station was about 1.5 hours by car. After moving into the guard station, solar power was not working, and I hadn't slept for about a month due to the various factors, bats in the cabin and something walking on the deck at night. The woods there always had an eerie feeling about them, unlike the southwest Ponderosa forest that I was used to. About 2 months into the seasonal job, I started to hear something walking and scratching on the deck at night. Perhaps even on the door. Now, this district was known for its badgers and beavers, so I didn't think much of it. When leaving the cabin at night, I always had an eerie feeling, like I was being watched. One night, I was returning from my grocery run, always one on Tuesdays nights, and I had a bad feeling. At the time, I did not have my shotgun in the vehicle. After stepping out of the vehicle, I looked to the right of the cabin. About 50 feet from my front door, all I could see were two eyes about 3.5 to 4 feet in the air. To say I freaked out was an understatement. I started yelling, "Get the fuck out of here!" But the eyes only crouched down an inch closer. At this point, I could tell it was a large animal of some kind. Definitely not a coyote. I tossed a piece of firewood in the general area and the creature leaped back a bit, but did not make a sound. I tossed 4 or 5 more pieces and the creature still inched forward. At this point, I fumbled with the keys and of course, the fucking solar power was out again. I managed to get inside and grab my shotgun. Technically, we were not supposed to have guns in government housing, But the fuck that, I was not going to be living in this hills have eyes back country and not carry a gun. I went outside, and the creature was a bit closer. Still, I could not get a good look with my shitty headlamp. I loaded the shotgun and continued to throw pieces of wood at it with one hand. Finally, the creature walked back into the brush. That night, I drank about 4 IPAs and slept with my shotgun. In the morning, the trail crew came up and we found a mountain lion tracks all over the porch, rocking bench, and compound leading back to the creek. After that event, I always heard the rocking chair move or someone or something walking on the porch, but never found any tracks after that point. Considering that it was always muddy up there, it was weird not to find any tracks. I've been stalked by mountain lions before and never had that eerie feeling like I did in those woods.
To start things off, I am 14 now, but this took place a week before my 14th birthday. My parents were divorced and my dad just moved into his new house a few months prior. He moved into the Rockies from the plains of Colorado so he could be closer to work. You see, before this, he had to take a 2-hour drive every day up the mountains to get to work where he would have an 11-hour shift, then drive back. He was a cop and had just gotten back to work after 8 months from his second major back injury. He ended up suing workers' comp and got a decent sum of money from that. So after a few months when Christmas rolled around, he got me and my brother AR-15s. I know what you're thinking, but we have grown up around guns and wouldn't think twice about seeing guns laying around the house. We enjoyed Christmas Day, and when the nighttime rolled around, we went to our rooms and had the guns in our rooms as we slept. Now, before I tell you the next part, you must know that there are a lot of jobs up here in the mountains. Also, my room has 2 windows, one to the left of me and one on the other end of my bed. Anyway, I awoke in the middle of the night, and mind you that I am a deep sleeper, and it is almost impossible to wake me up without shaking me. Immediately something felt off, so I just stayed still and tried listening to what was going on while pretending I was asleep. I was facing the window to the left of me where I could see the forest out my window, when I heard it, the lightest tap on the window I was facing. If I wasn't listening, I wouldn't have heard it. I couldn't see anything that could be making that sound, so I just watched and listened. About a minute later, I hear the tap again, followed by the crunching of compact snow. Then I saw it. Behind a tree about 20 feet from my window, I saw 2 glowing eyes peer out. About 30 seconds later, I saw the arm of someone break off a branch and throw it at my window. Not wanting the person to know I was awake, I slowly slid off the other end of my bed and grabbed my AR-15 and loaded a magazine into it. My adrenaline was pumping because the nearest house was at least a quarter mile away, and we were deep in the woods. Not wanting the intruder to know I was awake, I didn't charge the handle because of how loud it is. I put my phone in my shirt and texted my dad that someone is to the east of the house, and immediately after I heard the sliding glass door above me slide open and the flashlight on my dad's AR light up the area. The guy ran, and I could see he was wearing nothing but underwear and boots. My dad gave chase, but after going a mile into the woods and searching for about an hour, barefoot and in his shorts, in the snowy woods of the Rockies, he gave up. After, he texted someone on duty at the time, and searching the surrounding woods, all they found was a shirt and a candle on a tree branch.